People think power in America belongs to billionaires and their entitled wives. They are wrong. Real power lies in silent security codes and zero-exception federal contracts. When the CEO's wife slapped me and her husband fired me on the spot, they thought they were protecting an empire. They never realized that Sharp Sting was a ticking clock. A $2.4 billion digital bomb was just armed, and I alone hold the code to disarm it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. I want to sincerely thank you all for your incredible support, but unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to continue operating here. Because of this, we will be forced to stop uploading new videos on YouTube in the near future and will transition fully to Patreon. If you enjoyed today's story, please consider supporting us by joining our Patreon to hear exclusive real-life stories that are even better, much longer, and feature highly detailed situations with multiple emotional voices that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can join by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the video description or pinned comment. Now, let us dive right into today's story, where I, Ruby Gonzalez, will show you exactly what happens when arrogance meets absolute protocol. I am 34 years old, and my official title is Chief Cybersecurity Engineer at Sentinel Aerospace. We are a prominent defense technology conglomerate that, as of tonight, is standing on the absolute precipice of signing a $2.4 billion contract with the Pentagon. The project is known as the Rapid Response Navigation System. It is the absolute crown jewel of our entire corporate history, a piece of technology so advanced it practically redefines modern military logistics. Right now, I am sitting in a dimly lit, heavily secured alcove off the main lobby of the Grand Potomac Hotel in Washington, District of Columbia. High above me, in the opulent Grand Ballroom, a massive pre-deadline celebration gala is in full swing. Even through the thick architectural acoustics, I can hear the muffled, heavy bass of a live band playing and the constant clinking of crystal champagne flutes. The air up there is undoubtedly thick with the suffocating scent of expensive cologne, custom-tailored bespoke suits, and the quiet desperation of politicians mingling with defense contractors. It is a world of absolute excess, where powerful men pat each other on the back and toast to victories they did not actually build. Down here, however, the air is cold, sterile, and perfectly quiet. I am not wearing imported silk or diamonds. I am wearing a practical charcoal business suit, and a heavy government-issued security lanyard hangs around my neck. I am completely glued to a hardened, encrypted multi-screen display. My eyes trace the endless green and blue data streams flowing across the monitors. The United States Department of Defense does not hand over $2.4 billion on a simple handshake and a charming smile. They demand absolute, terrifying, mathematically proven security. Embedded deep within the hundreds of pages of our federal contract is what they formally refer to as the Zero Tolerance Clause. We are currently operating inside the final 24-hour handover window. During this highly critical period, the Pentagon system mandates that my specific Level 6 biometric key must remain active, authenticated, and in a continuous working status. My fingerprint, my retinal scan, and my unique cryptographic signature are literally the only things holding the security gates open while the Pentagon servers pull the massive, encrypted data packets from our mainframes. The protocol designed to protect this transfer is ruthless by design. If there is any sudden personnel change regarding my specific position within this 24-hour window, the system does not pause to ask questions. It does not wait for a corporate manager's approval or an email explaining the situation. If my biometric token is revoked, logged out unexpectedly, or terminated by human resources, the Department of Defense's Spiderweb protocol instantly activates. Spiderweb is essentially a digital guillotine. It is programmed to assume the absolute worst-case scenario, such as a compromised internal threat, a hostile foreign hack, or an act of corporate espionage. When triggered, it immediately and permanently locks down the entire project architecture. It severs the connection instantly and flags the entire contract as a catastrophic Level 1 security threat. Once Spiderweb deploys, there is absolutely no undo button, no executive overrides. The contract simply dies, and the $2.4 billion vanish into the federal void. The executives at Sentinel Aerospace, especially our Chief Executive Officer Julian Sterling, treat this technology like a magical box that just prints money. Julian has spent the last 3 hours upstairs taking all the credit, shaking hands with senators, and acting as if the money is already sitting comfortably in his personal offshore bank account. He thinks power is a signature on a piece of paper. He does not comprehend that power right now is a constantly refreshing digital handshake occurring every 3 seconds between my laptop and a secure server bunker in Virginia. If my laptop loses that connection, his entire empire falls. Suddenly, the soft, rhythmic chime of an incoming notification pulls my attention back to the central monitor. A bright blue prompt flashes across the screen. It is an automated system alert, indicating that we have exactly 8 hours remaining until the transfer is completely finalized. 8 hours until the Pentagon officially owns the network and Sentinel Aerospace gets paid. The physical exhaustion is really beginning to claw at the edges of my vision. I have been awake for 36 hours straight, meticulously monitoring every packet of data transferred to ensure absolutely zero packet loss or unauthorized firewall pings. I rub my temples, feeling the dull, throbbing ache of a caffeine withdrawal headache setting in. My thermal mug has been empty for several hours. To survive an all-night shift of this magnitude, I desperately need a cup of strong, black coffee. I lock my workstation, an action that requires a fresh retinal scan just to dim the screens while keeping the connection live and heavily encrypted. I adjust my security badge and decide to take a quick walk up the grand staircase to the mezzanine level where the gala is taking place. There is a high-end espresso bar set up near the coat check for the VIP guests. I figure I can slip in, grab a double shot of espresso, and slip right back down to my alcove before anyone even notices my presence. I have absolutely no interest in joining their party. I just need enough fuel to keep the biometric handshake alive for the next 8 hours. Stepping onto the mezzanine level was like walking into a gilded cage, designed exclusively for the ultra-wealthy. The grand ballroom was a dizzying spectacle of flashing camera bulbs, cascading floral arrangements, and endless trays of flowing champagne. At the exact center of the room, holding court like a modern monarch, stood our Chief Executive Officer, Julian Sterling. He had 3 United States senators cornered by a massive ice sculpture, gesturing grandly with his crystal glass. I could practically hear him already spending the $2.4 billion that had not even cleared the Federal Reserve yet. He was aggressively selling them on his visionary genius, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire corporate legacy was resting on a fragile digital thread running through my encrypted laptop downstairs. I ignored the extravagant spectacle and kept my head down, making a direct line for the temporary espresso bar, stationed near the heavy velvet curtains. The barista, dressed in a crisp white tuxedo jacket, quickly began pulling a double shot of dark roast for me. Just as I reached out to take the warm porcelain cup, the air around me was instantly overpowered by the heavy, suffocating scent of custom French perfume. A group of 4 women descended upon the bar, laughing shrilly. Leading the pack was Chloe Sterling, Julian's wife, a former runway model. Chloe treated every square inch of Washington like her own personal kingdom. She was wearing a blindingly expensive silver gown that caught every ray of ambient light, and she was clearly several glasses deep into the vintage champagne. Tucked tightly under one of her arms was a tiny, trembling, purebred teacup poodle, a creature that absolutely violated every health and safety code the luxury hotel possessed. The small dog was clearly distressed by the heavy, thumping bass of the live jazz band. Before anyone could react, the terrified animal convulsed and deposited a nasty, foul-smelling puddle of vomit directly onto the imported Persian rug near the edge of the mahogany bar. Chloe shrieked in absolute disgust, taking a dramatic, stumbling step back so the mess would not touch her designer heels. Her high society friends gasped in exaggerated, theatrical horror. Chloe snapped her head around, her manicured fingers tightly gripping her champagne flute. Her glassy eyes scanned the immediate area and landed directly on me. She took in my plain charcoal business suit, the distinct lack of diamond jewelry, and the thick security lanyard resting against my chest. In her deeply intoxicated, heavily entitled mind, the social equation was incredibly simple. I was not wearing sequins. Therefore, I was the help. You, Chloe barked, her voice cutting through the ambient noise like a jagged piece of glass. She pointed a sharp, diamond-encrusted finger at the floor. Clean this mess up immediately, and fetch my dog some sparkling water. I stood perfectly still, my hand hovering over my coffee cup. I looked down at the puddle, then up to her flushed, angry face. I apologize, ma'am, I replied, keeping my voice entirely level and professional. I do not work for the hotel. I am the chief cybersecurity engineer for Sentinel Aerospace. I am currently monitoring an active federal project handover downstairs, and I really do not have the time to assist you with this. The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. The soft murmurs of the surrounding VIP guests completely evaporated. Chloe's friends stared at me in sheer disbelief. In their insulated world, a lower-level corporate employee did not speak back to the queen bee. Regardless of the logic or the truth, Chloe's face turned a violent, mottled shade of crimson. Her absolute authority had just been publicly challenged in front of her elite inner circle. The social humiliation was way too much for her fragile, hyperinflated ego to process. She did not yell. She did not attempt to argue. She simply stepped forward, raised her right hand high, and swung with all her might. The slap was absolutely deafening. The sharp, explosive smack of her palm striking my left cheek echoed violently across the mezzanine. The physical force snapped my head completely to the side. My vision flashed brilliant white for a brief second, and a sharp, metallic taste of blood immediately flooded my mouth where my teeth had caught the inside of my cheek. Several VIP guests gasped loudly. A prominent defense contractor dropped his drink, the glass shattering into 100 pieces on the hardwood floor. I did not raise my hand to touch my burning face. I just slowly turned my head back, locking my eyes onto Chloe's horrified yet defiant stare. Before another word could be spoken, Julian Sterling pushed aggressively through the growing crowd. His face was a mask of sheer panic and furious anger. He looked at his wife, looked at the red mark blossoming on my face, and then desperately scanned the faces of the wealthy investors and powerful politicians who were now actively watching the drama unfold. Julian had a critical choice to make. He could act like a rational leader, investigate the physical assault, and de-escalate the situation. Instead, he instantly prioritized the optics of absolute dominance. He could not afford to look weak or let his wife be embarrassed in front of the very people he was trying to impress. He marched directly into my personal space, his face contorted in arrogant rage. "You are fired," Julian hissed, his voice intentionally loud enough for the investors to hear clearly. "Hand over your biometric security badge right this second and get the hell out of this building." I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear of humiliation. The intense, throbbing pain in my cheek was completely eclipsed by the icy, calculating logic now running rapidly through my brain. I reached up, slowly unclipping the heavy lanyard from my neck, and held it out to him. I looked him dead in the eyes and asked one single, perfectly calm question. "Are you absolutely certain you want to revoke my access right now, inside the active handover window?" Julian snatched the badge violently from my hand with a vicious, dismissive sneer. "Security!" he roared, waving to the heavy-set guards rushing over from the elevator banks. "Get this insubordinate trash out of my sight immediately." I nodded slowly, stepping back to let the hotel guards take my arms. I did not fight them, I just let them lead me away, feeling a strange, dark sense of absolute peace. Julian Sterling had no idea what he had just done. He thought he was protecting his fragile pride, but he had just detonated his own empire. The cool, damp night air of Washington hit my face like a refreshing shock as the heavy glass doors of the Grand Potomac Hotel slid shut behind me. I walked straight to the curb and hailed a yellow taxi. The sharp, stinging sensation on my left cheek slowly settling into a dull, rhythmic throb. As I slid into the quiet, leather-scented back seat and gave the driver my home address, I glanced at my wristwatch. The time was approaching midnight, miles away from my current location, inside the brightly lit Human Resources Department of Sentinel Aerospace. A frantic on-call duty manager was furiously typing on a mechanical keyboard. Julian Sterling had undoubtedly barked an executive order into his personal phone the second the hotel guards dragged me out of his sight. The manager hurriedly pulled up my secured employee file on their terminal. With a few quick, careless keystrokes, they permanently altered my active employment status. They typed the word terminated into the primary database and firmly hit the enter key. They thought it was just another standard bureaucratic update for an insubordinate employee. They had absolutely no idea. They had just pulled the safety pin on a massive digital grenade. The precise moment that keystroke registered on the internal corporate network. The continuous, highly encrypted digital handshake between my abandoned laptop at the hotel and the Department of Defense completely shattered, deep underground, inside a heavily guarded, climate-controlled server bunker in Virginia. The Pentagon mainframes instantly detected the catastrophic break in the biometric chain of custody. It took exactly 0.4 seconds for their automated, military-grade defense mechanisms to react. Back at the Sentinel Aerospace Network Control Center, a cavernous, windowless room filled with dozens of monitoring stations. The quiet hum of servers was violently interrupted. Every single monitor in the sprawling facility simultaneously snapped from a calm, flowing green to a harsh, blinding, blood red. The massive projection screen overlooking the entire room flashed with a terrifying, undeniable system alert. The spiderweb protocol was officially online. The digital guillotine dropped with ruthless efficiency. Massive steel blast doors of complex code slammed shut across the entire network architecture. The project status indicator, which had peacefully read "handover in progress" just moments before, instantly updated in bold, unforgiving text. It now read, Level 1 security threat. Marcus Thorne, the chief technology officer, had been sitting at the primary diagnostic terminal with his feet resting on the desk, coasting through what he confidently believed would be a quiet, uneventful overnight babysitting gig, when the screens abruptly turned red. His porcelain coffee cup slipped from his trembling fingers and shattered violently on the hard floor. The color completely drained from his face as his wide eyes darted frantically across the rapidly scrolling diagnostic logs. He saw the exact, undeniable point of failure. My specific Level 6 biometric key was gone, erased. He realized instantly that the Pentagon had aggressively slammed the door shut, completely locking the company out of their own $2.4 billion system. A suffocating panic violently seized his chest. Marcus sprinted out of the control room, his heart hammering painfully against his ribs, and scrambled toward the executive elevators to find Julian. Up in the lavish grand ballroom, Julian was currently standing on a small elevated stage, holding a crystal glass high in the air, delivering a smug, triumphant toast to the wealthy politicians and defense investors. Marcus practically tackled two private security guards just to reach the edge of the stage. He grabbed Julian tightly by the arm, pulling the chief executive officer roughly aside. Julian turned around, his face flushed with furious anger at the public interruption, but that arrogant rage quickly melted into pure, unadulterated terror as Marcus whispered frantically into his ear. The system was completely frozen. The Pentagon had flatly rejected the entire project because the sole key holder was illegally stripped of their access without proper federal authorization. The massive contract was rapidly bleeding out on the operating table. The countdown to permanent, irrevocable cancellation was no longer a comfortable 8 hours. The security breach had accelerated the automated failure state. They now had exactly 6 hours left until 6 o'clock in the morning before the Pentagon permanently deleted their access and walked away from the deal forever. I unlocked the front door of my apartment and stepped into the comforting, familiar darkness. I did not turn on the main overhead lights. I walked straight into my kitchen, the smooth hardwood floor feeling cool and grounding against my bare feet. I filled an electric kettle with filtered water and set it to boil. The absolute silence of my kitchen was a stark, beautiful contrast to the chaotic corporate nightmare I knew was currently unfolding across the city. I pulled a small, ceramic mug from the upper cabinet and dropped in a delicate bag of dried chamomile flowers. Suddenly, my heavy company smartphone, still sitting deep in my suit jacket pocket, began to vibrate with a violent, desperate intensity. It was the frantic, unmistakable, rapid-fire rhythm of a Tier 1 corporate emergency. I slowly took the device out, walked over to the stainless steel kitchen sink, and simply dropped it into the cold, empty metal basin. I poured the boiling water into my mug, silently watching the fragrant steam curl upward into the dark air. As I took my very first soothing sip of tea, the phone in the sink continued to rattle helplessly against the metal surface. I did not need to look at the bright caller identification screen. I knew exactly how the giant, arrogant machine was aggressively tearing itself apart from the inside, line by line, wire by wire, and there was absolutely nothing they could do to stop it. By 3 o'clock in the morning, the polished, impenetrable facade of Sentinel Aerospace was rapidly crumbling into absolute dust. Across the wealthiest suburbs of Washington, the private smartphones of every single board member began ringing in unison. These were men and women who were accustomed to sleeping soundly on beds of immense wealth, but tonight, they were violently pulled from their heavy slumber by frantic, hyperventilating crisis managers. The terrifying news was already leaking through the highly insulated corporate cracks, deep within the unregulated, international gray market, where institutional whispers turn into immediate financial action. A massive, silent panic was unfolding. Anonymous offshore accounts belonging to high-level executives who had caught wind of the catastrophic system failure were already quietly dumping their private shares. The sharks were circling the bloody water, and the massive corporate ship was sinking fast. Inside the subterranean network control center, the atmosphere had devolved into pure, unadulterated madness. Julian Sterling, the man who just hours ago believed he was an invincible titan of modern industry, was completely unrecognizable. His expensive, custom-tailored tuxedo jacket was thrown carelessly onto the floor. His crisp white dress shirt was completely soaked through with foul, nervous sweat, and his silk bow tie hung loosely around his neck like a frayed hangman's noose. He was pacing furiously behind the primary server terminals, his face a bright, dangerous shade of purple as he screamed at his terrified engineering team. "I do not care what the firewall restrictions say," Julian roared, his voice cracking with absolute desperation. "You are the best security technicians in the entire country. Hack into our own database right now. Bypass the federal lock and spoof her biometric signature. Take whatever data you have on her and force the connection back open. Trick the Pentagon servers into thinking she is sitting right here in this room." The engineers stared at him in paralyzed horror. Before any of them could muster the courage to explain the technical impossibility of his demand, the heavy reinforced door of the control center swung open. The chief legal counsel for Sentinel Aerospace stormed into the room, his face pale and drained of all blood. He marched directly up to the screaming executive and grabbed his shoulder. "Julian, you need to stop this completely insane behavior right this second," the lawyer hissed, his voice trembling with genuine fear. "What you are openly ordering these employees to do is not just a breach of corporate policy. It is a severe federal felony. You are demanding that they actively forge Department of Defense security protocols to deceive the United States government. If you proceed down this path, you are looking at a minimum of 20 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. You cannot simply hack your way out of a federal security lockdown." But Julian was entirely beyond the reach of logic or legal counsel. The intoxicating arrogance that had built his career was now acting as a blinding poison. He violently shoved the lawyer away, blindly ignoring the dire warning, convinced that his immense wealth and sheer willpower could magically bend federal law to his absolute advantage. Meanwhile, several floors above the chaos, inside the lavish presidential suite of the Grand Potomac Hotel, a totally different kind of breakdown was occurring. Chloe Sterling was collapsed onto the expensive imported carpets, her glamorous silver gown tangled around her knees. The heavy dark mascara she wore was completely ruined, streaming down her flushed cheeks in ugly black rivers. The sheer gravity of what she had done had finally pierced through her thick bubble of intoxicating privilege. Julian had stormed into the room briefly before heading to the servers, screaming vicious insults at her, viciously blaming her entirely for the catastrophic destruction of his legacy. The woman who just hours prior had demanded I clean up after her dog was now weeping uncontrollably on the floor, hyperventilating as she realized her single, arrogant slap had just instantly vaporized their entire billionaire lifestyle. Back in the quiet, peaceful sanctuary of my apartment, my personal cellular phone began to buzz softly against the wooden surface of my nightstand. I had left the corporate device drowning in the kitchen sink, but I kept my private line active for genuine emergencies. I glanced at the glowing screen and saw an unknown, unlisted number. I knew exactly who it was. I picked up the device and pressed it to my ear, remaining completely silent. "Ruby, please, I am begging you to listen to me." The frantic, breathless voice of Marcus Thorne, the chief technology officer, echoed through the small speaker. He had sneaked into a quiet utility closet to make this desperate, untraceable call. "Julian has completely lost his mind. The entire network is burning to the ground. If you just get in a taxi right now and come back, we can fix this together. I will personally guarantee you a $10 million bonus, completely off the books, wired directly into any account you choose by tomorrow morning. Just please, come back and unlock the system." I sat on the edge of my bed, looking out the window at the peaceful, sleeping city. I felt absolutely no anger, no vindictiveness, only a cold, unshakable adherence to the very rules they had hired me to enforce. "I cannot," I replied, my voice completely smooth and devoid of any emotion. "Restoring Level 6 security clearance for a terminated employee requires Federal Oversight Committee approval, which takes 30 days. The law is the law." Marcus let out a choked, devastated sob on the other end of the line, but I did not wait to hear his final plea. I gently ended the call and placed the phone back down on the wooden table. I reached over, switched off my bedside lamp, and pulled the soft, warm blanket over my shoulders. I closed my eyes and peacefully drifted off to sleep, perfectly content to leave a multi-billion-dollar empire thrashing violently in an invisible digital fire that they themselves had so arrogantly ignited. The synchronized digital clocks mounted across the cold, windowless walls of the network control center simultaneously rolled over to exactly 5 o'clock in the morning. The atmosphere inside the subterranean bunker had completely deteriorated from frantic panic into a toxic, suffocating despair. The ambient temperature of the room had dropped, but the exhausted engineers were drenched in cold, nervous sweat. Julian Sterling, a man who had built his entire identity on the illusion of absolute control, was now utterly cornered. He resembled a trapped, feral animal. His eyes were bloodshot and completely sunken into his skull, aggressively darting across the sea of blaring red monitors. The reality of losing a $2.4 billion contract was finally shattering his fragile psyche, pushing him far past the boundaries of rational thought and directly into the realm of criminal insanity. With only 1 hour remaining before the Pentagon permanently terminated their connection, Julian made his final, fatal mistake. He aggressively shoved a terrified systems analyst out of a leather chair and slammed his hands down onto the metal desk. He leaned over the primary terminal, his voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper. "Open her confidential human resources file," Julian commanded, completely ignoring the horrifying legal implications of his words. "Pull up her mandatory medical records." When she was hired, she had to submit high-resolution retinal scans and precise fingerprint vectors for her background check. Find those files, extract the raw biometric data, and route it directly into the authentication portal. We are going to force the system to reboot. The young analyst froze, his hands trembling violently as they hovered over the mechanical keyboard. "Sir, I cannot do that," the analyst pleaded, his voice cracking with sheer terror. Extracting confidential medical biometrics without explicit consent is a massive federal violation. Injecting that stolen data into a Department of Defense gateway is textbook cyber terrorism. If we simulate her biometric signature, the system will assume we are a hostile foreign entity. Julian violently grabbed the back of the analyst's chair, his knuckles turning pure white. You will do exactly as I say right this second, or I will personally ensure you never work in this industry again and sue you into absolute bankruptcy. Enter the data. Trembling under the suffocating weight of Julian's tyrannical threat, the defeated engineer began typing. He bypassed internal firewalls, illegally breached my highly confidential medical files, and meticulously copied the digital maps of my retinas and the unique ridges of my fingerprints. He painstakingly packaged the stolen biometric data into an encrypted payload, targeting the frozen federal gateway. Julian hovered over his shoulder, heavily panting, his eyes wide with a desperate, toxic hope. In his arrogant mind, security was just a locked door, and he had just stolen the master key. He genuinely believed he had outsmarted the United States military. Press enter, Julian ordered. The analyst closed his eyes and firmly pressed the key. What Julian Sterling, his wealthy board of directors, and his elite engineers entirely failed to realize was that I am not just a standard network administrator. My foundational background was rooted deeply in military counter-espionage. I had spent years studying the absolute worst aspects of human nature, specifically how powerful billionaires act when they believe nobody is watching. I fully anticipated that the executives at Sentinel Aerospace might one day attempt to circumvent the federal protocols to protect their massive profits. Therefore, months before this project even began, I secretly buried a highly classified, invisible mechanism deep within the core architecture of my Level 6 authentication sequence. It was a digital trap known in the intelligence community as a honeypot. The honeypot was designed to remain completely dormant unless one highly specific, deeply illegal condition was met. It constantly monitored the physical origin point of my biometric data. If the system ever detected a forceful injection of my fingerprints and retinal patterns, originating from a network terminal address that did not perfectly match my authorized, physical workstation, it would recognize the intrusion as a catastrophic insider threat. It was a flawless, invisible tripwire. It did not merely deny access, it was programmed to silently absorb the fake data, completely lock the intruders inside the portal, and immediately trigger a silent alarm. Back in the control center, the blaring red screens suddenly flickered and transitioned into a calm, solid black. The heavy, panicked breathing of the engineering team completely stopped. A terrifying, absolute silence fell over the massive room. For one brief, agonizing second, Julian actually smiled, completely convinced that his illegal brute force tactic had successfully overridden the lockdown. He believed he had won. Then, the black screens illuminated with a single, glowing line of stark white text. The message did not come from the internal servers of Sentinel Aerospace. It was broadcast directly from the heavily guarded mainframe at the Pentagon. Julian stepped closer to the primary monitor, his eyes straining to read the glowing words. His breath hitched violently in his throat as the text slowly rendered across every single screen in the facility. National security forgery detected. Level 1 insider threat confirmed. Automated emergency overrides engaged. Transmitting complete activity logs to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Justice. The heavy porcelain mug sitting on the edge of the desk crashed to the floor, shattering into dozens of pieces. Julian stumbled backward, his legs suddenly losing all their strength. He collapsed onto the cold, hard floor of the bunker. The realization of what he had just done washed over him like a suffocating wave of ice. He had not just lost the $2.4 billion contract, he had personally ordered his staff to hack the federal government, and the system had just automatically handed all the undeniable digital evidence directly to the authorities. His extravagant life of luxury, his massive mansions, and his relentless arrogance were entirely gone, instantly replaced by the terrifying, inescapable certainty of a federal prison sentence. Outside the heavily fortified walls of the corporate headquarters, The first soft rays of morning light began to break over the horizon. The sky above Washington, District of Columbia, transitioned from a bruised purple to a brilliant, glowing orange. The majestic white marble of the Capitol monuments began to reflect the dawn. It was a beautiful, peaceful morning for the rest of the country, but it officially marked the dawn of the absolute worst day in the entire corporate history of Sentinel Aerospace. Miles away, inside the quiet sanctuary of my apartment, I naturally woke up to the gentle sunlight streaming through my bedroom window. I stretched my arms, feeling completely rested and entirely at peace. I walked into my living room, sat down at my small wooden desk, and opened my personal, heavily encrypted laptop. I entered my secure passcode and checked my private relay server. Sitting quietly in my inbox was a single, automated encrypted token. It was the confirmation receipt from my hidden honeypot. The trap had been successfully triggered. I leaned back in my chair and let out a soft, quiet breath. The final, devastating checkmate was officially complete. I did not have to lift a single finger to destroy Julian Sterling. His own boundless greed, his toxic arrogance, and his absolute refusal to respect the rules had pulled the trigger for me. At exactly 10 minutes before 6 in the morning, the heavy reinforced glass doors of both the Sentinel Aerospace headquarters and the Grand Potomac Hotel were simultaneously breached by the absolute, uncompromising force of the federal government. Dozens of unmarked black tactical vehicles aggressively surrounded the perimeters, their flashing red and blue lights painting the dawn streets of Washington. Heavily armed agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, operating directly alongside Stern, uncompromising inspectors from the Department of Defense, swarmed the buildings in perfect, terrifying synchronization. Julian Sterling had desperately fled the subterranean server bunker and rushed back to his luxury presidential suite, frantically attempting to pack a leather bag with his offshore bank credentials and passports. He did not even make it out of the hallway. At precisely 6 o'clock in the morning, a final, definitive system chime echoed through the frozen servers. Downtown, the absolute, undeniable deadline had been reached. The Pentagon officially severed all digital ties, instantly and permanently withdrawing the $2.4 billion contract back into the Federal Reserve. The money was gone forever, and with it, the entire foundation of the company. At that exact same moment, the grand lobby elevator doors of the hotel forcefully opened. Julian Sterling was shoved out into the open space. The man who had spent the entire night demanding absolute obedience from politicians and engineers was now forcefully pressed against the marble reception desk. His wrists were bound tightly behind his back in cold, heavy steel handcuffs. Chloe Sterling stood just a few feet away, trembling violently. She was still wearing her ruined, champagne-stained silver designer gown. She clutched her face, completely speechless and horrified, as the lead federal agent looked Julian dead in the eye. "Julian Sterling," the agent announced, his voice booming across the silent lobby. "You are under federal arrest. You are being charged with severe sabotage of national security and multiple counts of federal wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent, which I highly suggest you use." 9:30 in this morning arrived with the violent, unforgiving ringing of the Wall Street opening bell. The financial slaughter that followed was absolute, immediate, and entirely merciless. The moment the market opened, institutional investors and private shareholders simultaneously dumped their holdings. In the very first 15 minutes of active trading, Sentinel Aerospace stock plummeted by a staggering 85%. The trading floor became a chaotic bloodbath of red numbers. The company was completely hollowed out. Less than 1 week later, the shattered, disgraced corporation formally filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, completely dissolving the once mighty empire into a sea of endless federal audits. Chloe Sterling faced her own brand of absolute devastation. I personally retained a top-tier attorney and filed a massive civil lawsuit against her for the unprovoked public physical assault. Because Julian's corporate assets and all of their associated family trust funds were immediately frozen by the Department of Justice pending the federal criminal investigation. Chloe was left with absolutely no access to her wealth. She was swiftly evicted from her massive, gated estates, stripped of her money and her status. She instantly became the ultimate cautionary tale and a permanent, pathetic laughingstock among the exact same high society circles she had once so ruthlessly ruled. A few weeks after the collapse, I was formally summoned to a highly secure federal courthouse to provide expert witness testimony regarding the honeypot trap. It was in those quiet, marble hallways that I crossed paths with the four-star Pentagon general who had originally championed the defense contract. He pulled me aside. He did not see a terminated, insubordinate employee. He saw a highly capable cybersecurity engineer who possessed the absolute, unshakable integrity to stand her ground, enforce the law, and let a billionaire's empire burn to the ground rather than compromise the national security of the United States. Fast forward 6 months. I stood peacefully by the expansive, floor-to-ceiling windows of my newly leased, corner office space in downtown Washington. I had officially launched my own private cybersecurity consulting firm. Resting proudly on my heavy oak desk was my very first signed contract as an independent enterprise, entirely negotiated and generously funded by none other than the United States Department of Defense. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of hot, black coffee across the bustling city street. A massive, faded red banner reading "For Sale" hung sadly over the locked, abandoned front entrance of the former Sentinel Aerospace headquarters. I smiled softly to myself, watching the morning traffic roll by. In the end, the digital system is never actually at fault. It possesses no emotions, no inherent greed, and no social bias. It merely acts as a perfect, unyielding mirror, reflecting the exact rot, arrogance, and corruption of the powerful people who arrogantly believe they can control it. Thank you all so much from the bottom of my heart for taking the time to listen to my story today. I'd love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know your city or country in the comments below. As a gentle reminder, because YouTube has completely demonetized this channel, we will unfortunately no longer be uploading new videos here in the near future. We are transitioning entirely to Patreon to keep bringing you these incredible narratives. If you found today's story satisfying and want to help us survive, please consider supporting us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon. Over there, you can listen to our absolute best, most exclusive real-life revenge stories that are simply too intense for us to publish publicly on YouTube. You can easily join our community right now by scanning the Patreon QR code visible on your screen, or by clicking the direct link provided in the video description or the pinned comment below. Thank you again for your incredible support, and stay safe out there.